Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. And Amy, before we begin the show, I must remark about the New York Times article today, a front-page article on Sonia Sotomayor, the nominee for the Supreme Court. The Times examines her role as a member of the board of directors of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund in the 1980s. They say, the paper of record says it has so far received scant attention. Of course, as Democracy Now! Listeners and viewers know, it only has received scant attention in the Times because we had a major segment on Wednesday, and I reported as well in New York Daily News about Sonia Sotomayor's involvement with what was really the premier civil rights law firm for the Latino community in the Northeast. It has been now for more than 3 decades. And the Times is raising questions that conservative critics may try to use that against Sotomayor in the confirmation hearings that will be held in the Senate.
In another piece, they talk about her active questioning, diligent questioning around the case of Maher Arar, a case that we have covered quite extensively here on Democracy Now!, the Canadian citizen who was the victim of extraordinary rendition. That's simply White House for kidnapping, went through JFK Airport and was sent by U.S. authorities to Syria, where he was born, but where he was, it was Canada that was his home for decades, and he was tortured and he was held for more than 10 months, sent home to Canada and awarded $10 million. U.S. government is yet to apologize and keeps him on a terrorist watch list.
Yes. Well, now to Korea. Tension is rising on the Korean Peninsula following North Korea's underground nuclear test on Monday and a series of subsequent missile tests. The United States and South Korea raised their military alert level Thursday after the North said it would abandon the 1953 truce that ended the Korean War. The U.S.-South Korea Combined Forces Command alert level is now at 3, the highest it has been since North Korea's only other nuclear test in 2006. Earlier in the week, South Korea announced it would join a U.S.-led initiative to intercept ships suspected of carrying nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, components, or missiles to deliver them. Pyongyang has warned it would consider South Korea's membership in the Proliferation Security Initiative to be an act of war.
At the United Nations, the U.S. and Japan have circulated a draft UN Security Council resolution condemning Pyongyang's nuclear test and calling for strict enforcement of UN sanctions imposed on North Korea after its first atomic test in October of 2006. The U.S.-backed draft also demands North Korea not conduct any more nuclear tests, cease any advances in the ballistic missile program, and allow the return of international nuclear inspectors to monitor North Korea's nuclear activities. On Thursday, President Obama's National Security Advisor, James Jones, addressed the North Korea situation during an interview on National Public Radio.
Nothing that the North Koreans did surprised us. We knew that they were going to do this. They said so no reason not to believe it. But the imminent threat is the proliferation of that kind of technology to other countries and potentially to terrorist organizations, non-state actors. And that is, in my view, the most imminent danger.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has accused North Korea of acting in a provocative and belligerent manner.
North Korea has made a choice. It has chosen to violate the specific language of the UN Security Council Resolution 1718. It has ignored the international community. It has abrogated the obligations it entered into through the 6-party talks. And it continues to act in a provocative and belligerent manner toward its neighbors. There are consequences to such actions. I want to underscore the commitments that the United States has and intends always to honor for the defense of South Korea and Japan. That is part of our alliance obligation, which we take very seriously.
We're joined now by Bruce Cumings. He's professor at the University of Chicago, author of several books on Korea, including Korea's Place in the Sun, A Modern History, and North Korea, Another Country. Professor Cumings, welcome to Democracy Now! Talk about the significance of this underground test. It's believed to be bigger than the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
Well, thank you, Amy. What we have here is another train wreck that, if you're paying attention to U.S.-North Korean relations, you can see coming from a mile away. And we already had this train wreck in 2006. As you just said, the U.S. and South Korean forces moved up to a level 3 defense alert after the North Korean bomb, the first bomb, was detonated in October 2006. But if you backtrack to our Independence Day, July 2006, North Korea tested a long-range missile, several 6 or 7 medium-range missiles that could hit Japan. And they purposely chose July 4th to get the attention of the Bush administration. At this time, they tested the missiles first and then chose our Memorial Day to test their second bomb on May 25th. They do these things with great calculation. This latest bomb test was an obvious attempt to get Obama's attention, and they're acting out of the same playbook that worked for them in 2006. In other words, George W. Bush, who didn't talk to evil and didn't reward bad behavior, turned around within weeks of the first North Korean test in October of '06 and started direct bilateral talks with the North Koreans in Berlin. This led to the February 2007 agreement to freeze and dismantle the North's plutonium facility. That was the second time the North had agreed to freeze and dismantle its entire complex. The first was with Bill Clinton in 1994. So unlike Iran, we have two pieces of evidence that North Korea was willing to give up its plutonium program for 8 years. It was frozen for 8 years. And then they agreed again in 2007 to do this. So the media, I should say the mainstream media, not Democracy Now!, they pay no attention. Along comes North Korea trying to get our attention. They do a bunch of provocative things, and there's no question that what they're doing is provocative, but it's nothing new for them. And then people pay attention, but without the context that's so essential to understand this. The Obama administration, and especially Secretary of State Clinton, are running on the same tracks as George Bush did in '07 and '08. They're even talking about the Proliferation Security Initiative, PSI, which is something that was handcrafted by John Bolton to put pressure on North Korea. So President Obama needs to pay attention to a situation that he actually might be able to solve if he paid attention, get back to talks with North Korea, and if he can solve this problem, as his predecessors did, at least temporarily, he would put tremendous pressure on Iran also to give up its enriched uranium program. So I think that's what's going on, but you really, you have to read the fine print of even our paper of record to find any of this out. For example, this morning we learned, of course, they've raised the alert to high levels, but our commanders say there's no unusual military activity in North Korea. North Korea doesn't want a war. But this train wreck could have been seen coming from a mile away, or 2 years away at least. And the Obama administration is just not paying attention.
Professor Cumings, if we could take sort of a longer historical view, one of the things that apparently North Korea has done is that it's tearing up the truce agreement that ended the Korean War. But the Korean War was almost 60 years ago now, and most Americans don't even know that there was really no final peace agreement to that war. Why has a final agreement between Korea and the United States eluded our government and their government for so many years?
Well, it's a very good question. It actually goes back before the Korean War, because in 1945 the U.S. Divided Korea unilaterally. The Soviets eventually supported that. We put 25,000 combat troops into Korea, deeply shaped post-war Korean history through a 3-year military government. And here we are 64 years later, having stumbled into a civilizational thicket that we didn't understand then and don't understand now. And we have no exit strategy and the possibility of a new war. So this is a failed policy. The Korean War ended with an armistice that the South did not sign, refused to sign it, and the North Koreans have used that against the South ever since. But in the last 15 years, they've been calling for a peace treaty or a peace agreement to finally end the war. And there was a great deal of negotiation in the mid-90s under the so-called four-party talks that Bill Clinton and Kim Young-sam, the South Korean president, and Kim Jong-il involved themselves in, along with the Chinese, they got very close to an end to the Korean War, some sort of an agreement that would end it. But after that, and really for the last decade, the North has threatened many times to break the armistice. They've said many times they're not bound by it. This is another, it's 0.8 on their ratchet up the tension scale. But it doesn't really mean much. It's a lot of rhetoric. What it means fundamentally is they'd like to end the Korean War. And that's another thing President Obama could get done if he'd pay attention and get rid of a lot of Bush holdovers and Clinton holdovers in his administration.
What do you mean by that? Who is